Hi, I'm Greg Farrar. It's May 27th, and this is my COVID-19 Trends live stream. I will go over the countries of the world, followed by the states of the United States, followed by the counties of California, the three focus areas. Let's dive right in. So, total cases, United States leading as always. It's interesting to know that Brazil is well ahead in second place of Russia. And then we've got the United Kingdom, Italy, and Spain. These are the somewhat smaller ones, and then all the rest. And also maybe worth noting that in total new cases, the United States has been dropping, of course, and Russia is also dropping, which is maybe not so, of course. Russia was kind of 3 weeks ago news, but now it seems to be doing better, but it's certainly not dropping quickly. But Brazil then finishes the slash of this backwards Z, where we have Brazil rising while United States and Russia drop. Brazil has not quite yet passed the United States, but it really looks likely to. The United States' very latest data point is right around the point where Brazil's trend line lands. On the other hand, the four most recent points for Brazil are down from its peak for previous data points. So maybe, just maybe, Brazil's going to level out right here and maybe never will cross the United States. Anyway, total cases, I think, is less informative than per capita. And so in those cases, ignoring the population gives us numbers like those. But I think this graph shows a more interesting report, which is how countries are doing relative to each other. As always, we see Qatar, oddly, and in this massively high number. Qatar in per capita is doing much, much worse than the rest of the world. It is a small country, so it just doesn't make the news. But there's no comparison. Qatar is 3 or 4 times worse than everybody else. It has 700. These numbers here on the left of the graph, I've been talking a lot in these terms. How many new cases does a region have per million people per day? So Qatar right now, in its most recent day, has had almost 700 people, new cases per million. We actually look at Qatar just to give a sense of how these graphs are so radically different when you start compensating by population. Qatar has 1,800 roughly new cases, and that kind of blows my mind. 1,800 is a lot. Sometimes we look at these little places and we say, oh, 10 new cases, 20 new cases today. 1,800 is a lot, but then it's nothing like what the United States has. The United States, even after declining, is still at 10 times that. But it's amazing that Qatar is anywhere near the ballpark of the United States, given that Qatar has 2 or 3 million people and the United States has 200 or 300 million people. So and that's another way of saying Qatar has it 10 times worse than the United States, because it's only off by a factor of 10, but its population is different by a factor of 100. So nevertheless, in total cases, Qatar does not have a huge number of cases, but compensating by population, recognizing how small it is way out there. So I do like talking in terms of these numbers of 700 being an extremely bad number. We pretty much have not seen 700, I think. I'm not sure we've ever seen 700, maybe occasionally a day. But Qatar, at the worst, New York was in the 500 range. New York had it very bad, doesn't anymore. Italy and Spain, I keep wanting to go back and look, but as I recall, they may have been in the high hundreds, 500, 600, 700, maybe 700, but I'm guessing 500 range. So Qatar, which continues to rise, there's no real sense that this is dropping off. Qatar continues to have an epidemic, albeit in a small country, which proportionally is at a scale that's we've never seen, or we have not seen in this COVID pandemic. Second is Chile. Chile is a significantly sized country. It's much larger than Qatar. but it's doing better overall. But still, it's a solid number 2, being above 200 on that, I think, important metric. How many cases per million per day, per million people per day? Peru in 3rd place. Both of them are part of that Central South America cluster that we've seen have been very problematic in the past couple of weeks, maybe 4 weeks. Central South America has risen to be the dominant cluster, the new hotspot. I've been using the word warm spot when something passes 100. So these two are warm spots. Chile is even a little hot. Qatar is white hot. Nobody else is a hot spot. Maybe just barely Belarus. But if you zoom in here, nobody's even a warm spot worldwide. But we have a few that look like they might be heating up. The UAE, Brazil, Saudi Arabia. These are all probably rising, still not very large in per capita. Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, Brazil is as big as the United States, population-wise. Not quite, but 200 million people in the ballpark. So Brazil, compare Brazil with the United States. These are the top 2 in total cases right now, and they're going in very different directions. Brazil is looking a little better now. The past 4 days are looking a little better. So yeah, again, it may start to trend downward. But per capita, the United States clearly trending downward pretty steadily over many weeks, doing much better than Brazil. So those are our worst 2 in total numbers. And then there's Russia, which has peaked, it appears, several weeks ago and is slowly descending. It's doing a kind of United States speed descent. It's not doing one of our New Yorks or Italys that we see where suddenly there's a hill, it goes up sharply, peaks, drops off sharply. We've seen that in a lot of places. We're not seeing that in the United States. It went up sharply, peaked, and is dropping slowly. And Russia may be doing the same thing. If we take out all the noise here, so we just see Russia, it's pretty easy to imagine there was a quick rise here, a peak around here, and a slow drop coming. But we'll see. The drop is maybe a little bit horizontal right now. The trend line thinks it's horizontal. And just to throw in a couple more, United Kingdom and India. Worth noting that India, from the perspective of this metric I keep using, is a cold spot. It's around 5 per million people per day. 5 per million people per day, whereas where 100 is where I start to get concerned. That said, India has immense potential to very slowly, as it is growing, to continue to very slowly grow until suddenly there are 1 billion people with the virus over the next year or something. So India is certainly not out of the woods, but it's just worth noting that per capita it's doing very well. Let's look at the rope chart, which shows us our direction of growth for various things, various countries in this case. Ecuador, we're still not sure about. It had this weird shape. I'm just going to ignore it because it had some very strange data. It is Central South America, and we can imagine it may be following the trends of Chile and Peru and Brazil, which makes it something of a cooling off warm spot. Chile has a pretty high growth rate, 7% daily growth rate, but at least it's stable. It's not accelerating. In fact, if you look at this, there are almost no countries that are accelerating in their growth rate. The Netherlands, weirdly, since Europe as a whole has really gotten over this thing, the Netherlands is the worst in terms of the angle of its growth. It appears, according to the data that we're basing this on, thank you to ourworldindata.org, it appears to be trending to have crossed back around the corner towards positive growth. That's unusual. Europe has been doing very well, but according to this, the Netherlands, let's just zoom in on that briefly. It does seem to be showing some kind of a little bit of a growth spurt. Now, it is number 25 on our list, and I usually blow past the number 20 through 25 pretty quick because they give weird outlier results because there are not that many cases. So nothing really to be worried about. Netherlands is very small, but something, if that continues, where the Netherlands could become a new warm spot or even eventually hot spot, in Europe. So we are seeing a lot of horizontal lines here. There are a lot of countries, a fair number of countries, let's count them, that are growing still. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, I think I'm counting, out of the 25 are showing growth. Now, half of those are trending towards zero growth, especially Saudi Arabia and Pakistan seem to be doing well. They seem to be about to turn the corner back into zero growth. And then there are about 5 of them that are almost horizontal but slightly aimed downward. Qatar, Iran, UAE, Peru, all heading downward. Also Brazil, maybe Mexico to some degree. So look, Brazil is doing well on one metric, which is its growth rate is shrinking. It has fewer new cases every day. And then there are these four most problematic countries: Chile, Bangladesh, India, and Mexico. These are problematic because they're growing, and they're growing at a substantial pace, 7%, 5%. Not so much Mexico at a mere 3 or 4%, but still, that's a daily rate. So you do 3% for a year, and you've got 1,000% or something, plus whatever multiplication goes in there, compounding your percentage rate. So this is a 3% daily rate is actually a real problem if it persists for any amount of time. And we've seen this in some countries where just by hanging at 2% for 6 weeks, they suddenly are showing up in the top 25 and looking kind of bad. So, and these are the growth rates for those 4 countries are not shrinking. We still see those 4 countries continuing to grow steadily, not accelerating, but continuing to grow in daily new cases. So that's overall, it's a pretty good picture of the world. To zoom out again and take another kind of quick look. It obviously could be better. We'd like all of them to be below zero, but most of them are below zero, or at least half of them are below zero. The ones that are above zero, about half of them are heading towards zero. The ones that are below zero, we have a couple of outliers in the Netherlands and Ecuador that I would tend to ignore, because they're so small right now. Other than that, the only real problem line below zero is Spain, which seems to be losing some of its momentum, but it's still below zero. So as long as it doesn't cross that, it'll get over it. And we see something like 75% of the countries are looking pretty good, and no one is looking terrible. Maybe 25% are looking not great. But we've seen worse for the countries. We've seen better. There's still this sense of the whole world and the United States and California are all hanging in a balance. And you can't look at this and say it's recovering, but you also can't look at it and say things are going very poorly very quickly. It's hanging in a balance, and at the world level, I'd say it's getting a little better. But then you look at this, the world as a whole is still growing 1% per day. And as mentioned, 1% per day is hundreds of percents in a year. It will have a whole lot of new cases in a year if this doesn't stop. We do have a nice downward mini trend here, but it's probably too short to really believe it. But maybe, sure would be great if each one of these points is an average of 7 days, so they're somewhat stable points. They don't have a lot of, they don't fluctuate too wildly. You can see this whole graph is fluctuating from negative 4% to positive 4%. There's not a lot of wild, large numbers here. So maybe this actually, having gone on for 7 or 8 or 9 days with really only one exception, maybe we are seeing the world suddenly swoop downward into a better place. Certainly the latest day, the last 7 days, is good. We have negative growth for 7 days on average. But the long-term trend still suggests that we aren't there yet. We have not turned back around to negative growth. And the world was at negative growth. I've been doing this for a couple months now, maybe, and as I recall, there was a time when the world was clearly shrinking in new daily cases, but no more. So something has happened to raise the number of cases. And as always, we don't know really what that is. It could be a new increase in infections. And if so, why is that? It could be because lockdowns are being lifted or because people are not following them. Or it could not be a new increase in infections at all. It could be infections are dropping, but the number of new cases is rising because we're catching more and more of them. I did just find an article in the context of California saying, I actually thought I was reading an up-to-date article at first, which was saying, we're now testing people in California that are asymptomatic. And as a person who lives in California and is asymptomatic, I've been wanting to get tested because why not? Just in case. We know there are a lot of asymptomatic people, and it would be nice to know if I were one of them. And it seemed as though they were just starting to open up to asymptomatic testing. But when I then finished the article and then looked at the date, it was more than a month ago. So California then has been testing asymptomatic people for a month. And I've gone onto a couple websites trying to figure out where can I get tested. I now have an actual appointment. It took me a while because I'd go there and I'd sign up and they'd say, great, but we don't have any appointments. But, and by the way, they did let me sign up even though I have no risk factors except for interstate travel, which is certainly a risk factor, but there are about 50 other risk factors they asked me about, and no, none of them. Haven't been exposed to anyone, don't have any symptoms, blah, blah, blah. So I, in California, am able to get tested without symptoms. And I tell you this medium-length story because it means that a lot of people around the world in California are probably now being tested who don't have symptoms. And that should mean that more and more we're going to be catching those asymptomatic cases, and that may be the reason we have more reported cases now, is because there's been a lot of testing of asymptomatic people. I've heard wildly different numbers about how many cases are asymptomatic. I tend to believe the 50% number, but I've heard numbers north of 90%. I don't know if those are legit, but in any case, there are a lot of asymptomatic people out there, and I hope, for the good of the world, that the reason we're still seeing this is the world as a whole is catching more and more cases. And if we had a magic graph that would actually tell us the number of infected people right now, not the number we know about, but the number who are actually infected, I hope that number would be dropping, but we don't know. We don't know that. All we know is the number of infected cases, which has always been a challenge in my analysis and many analyses. Some people say that the number of reported cases is completely worthless because it's not the number of actual cases. I say that it's probably correlated, at least over the long term, with the number of actual cases. And that certainly, if the number of actual cases drops to zero, so will the number of reported cases. I guarantee you that. If there are no more COVID-19 cases someday in the world, there will be no more reported COVID-19 cases. So there's an envelope of that holds it within, where if we can put it puts an upper limit on how many cases there could be. The number of infected cases does, but we don't know this. We don't know this multiplication factor really of how many undetected cases there are. We just know that the one pulls the other down. All right, yeah. So somehow I've made my way into the deaths here. Yeah, okay. I think I've done a reasonable coverage of the countries here. As always, I don't talk much about the deaths because they do tend to roughly mirror the cases in their general shape, but I will say the deaths week after week after week continue to drop, which I do not understand, and I always say that. Why are the deaths dropping when the cases are rising? Better treatment? Maybe. Good, it's good. And it also means that as time goes by, we lower and lower our estimates of the fatality rate of the virus. For whatever reason, people who get it aren't dying as often as they used to, it seems. And maybe we just know how to treat it better, or maybe the hospitals aren't as cluttered, or I don't know, maybe it's there is a tendency for viruses to mutate into less dangerous forms. If you have a virus that kills everyone, it dies because it kills everyone that it's in. And so viruses tend to quickly mutate towards less virulent forms, and I think that even could happen at the very low end of the scale. This is a really very benign virus compared to a whole lot of them, with maybe a 0.5% fatality rate. Still means millions of people dead potentially, but relative to other viruses, this is quite benign, and I don't know whether that effect that makes it even more benign effects. Even already benign viruses are only applies to something like Ebola or something that kills so many people that it has to mutate if it's going to survive. All right, population tested by country looking good as always. Iran finally passed 1% or very close to it. Lots and lots of countries that are doing very well. Qatar, Belgium, Russia. The United States is in here somewhere, really looking very good. As a country, the United States is looking very good, having well above 4% total tests. Something happened to these graphs. I'm not going to bother anyway. The daily testing by country, I think I have that somewhere, but suffice it to say that when the dots are above the line, purple dots above the purple line, that means that the testing is accelerating. We can really see that, for instance, in Belarus, where it's really outstripping its trend line, but also in the United States. These bluish dots that are on the orange Belarus line are United States dots, which are way above its trend line. And so the United States continues to accelerate its testing very nicely, as does everybody. So it's been longer than I would have guessed. A month ago I would have said that kind of acceleration of testing is going to track down everyone, and then the graphs will drop. That hasn't happened, and it may just be there's a tug of war between an actual growing infection in a lot of places and the testing still having not yet caught up. But I keep expecting that. I keep expecting to see these numbers drop. Now you look at somewhere like New York, mysteriously, given how it has been in the rest of the world, mysteriously New York is doing really well. Why did New York not spike and then very gradually fight its way down to zero, the way the United States as a whole has? Why did New York follow Italy and Spain's pattern, and New Jersey as well, of just spiking and dropping like a rock? I don't know. Good for New York. Maybe it's because they're very dense. Maybe it's because they're culturally homogeneous. Maybe because there's just a lot of transfer of people within New York all the time, whereas between states of the United States, for instance, there's not so much transfer. I don't know. What we seem to be seeing in the United States is a series of waves moving geographically across the United States, not necessarily in any particular direction, but just New York and New Jersey is over it. Now it's someone else's turn. How about Louisiana? Oh, Louisiana's over it. Now it's someone else's turn. How about Illinois? Now Illinois. How about Michigan? And so we see these ordered progression of states getting it badly and recovering fairly quickly. And what the way that translates to the country graph is that it's very slowly declining. As the worst cases get over it, new ones are coming. And when you add all these sequence of hills together, you get kind of a flat mountain range that never really seems to drop. But it does drop, and we are seeing the United States drop, so at least it's not rising. I'm going to go per capita. That's the way I like to look at things, and say, forgetting population, or rather including population, forgetting total numbers, how are the states doing compared to each other? And we are seeing some very nice shapes here. The worst ones from weeks ago are either well on their way to recovery or pretty much all the way there. New York is, which peaked around 400 or something, it's really 500 if we look at some of the individual dots, is now down to 40. So it's 90% recovered in daily cases. New Jersey, which also peaked around 400 or 500, is also down in that range, 80% recovered maybe. Massachusetts and Connecticut, which were significant, they were really around the same time. They were kind of a part of a New England cluster. Never got as bad as New York. Never got to be hot spots quite, but warm spots for sure. Maybe slightly hot. They're halfway to recovery. Those hills, when you see a hill, it's a good thing. We have a few other little ones like Louisiana, which never got to be really hot, maybe just barely crossed that 100 level to be a warm spot, and has dropped away pretty nicely. I think, let's take a little bit closer look at Louisiana. It's not totally clear that Louisiana, it's certainly not doing the sharp descent. It peaked at 100 It's now at 50, but it's had some pretty bad days, and it's kind of all over the map. So Louisiana doesn't seem to be out of the woods the way that New York and New Jersey probably are. But then we have about 5 here. I'll just point them out: Virginia, Iowa, Minnesota, Maryland, and Illinois, which are warm for sure. Warm spots, verging on hot, rising, all of them at least a little bit, maybe slightly flat in the case of a couple of them. But these are our new hot spots, those 5. No one else is really competing for those positions. Everyone else is dropping. All the previous hot spots are no longer warm even. But there are a few that are struggling to become hot spots. Trying, it would seem, to become hot spots. The way that these two, Illinois and Maryland, have leveled off, I'm guessing they're never going to cross 200, and they will drop away quickly or slowly and never become real hot spots. Minnesota is the only thing here that looks like it has a chance, even a possible chance of becoming anything like our historical hot spots, the 4 states we see back there. No one else has the angle that they would need, even given weeks, to reach a level of 300 or 400 or 500. I'm guessing Minnesota will never get there either. This was the first wave, and there were, maybe you could say that the New England, other lesser New England states were the second wave, and now this is kind of a very weak third wave in the 100 to 200 range per million new cases per day. And everyone else, there may be some significant growth in some of these cases, and some of the little ones down here. They may be growing. Some of them are. We'll see that in the rope chart. But they're all below 100, so it would take them a long time to grow to the point that they're anywhere in the running with our first wave hotspots. Doesn't mean we don't want everyone to be shrinking. Shrinking is what has to happen here. Any kind of growth at any level will eventually make you a hotspot, but there's no serious trend towards that anywhere here. If we actually look at the growth, however, certainly this is generally a good rope chart. You see most states below 0. Michigan is doing tremendously well. It's actually below my bottom here, a 7% drop per day. It is probably over in Michigan. There's still the whole long tail of, everyone wear a mask and stay indoors, and we'll see how that plays out in Michigan. Michigan probably has more resistance to that sort of advice than most places. But my guess is Michigan will be okay, even if they open up a lot more. My guess is they've got enough momentum and infrastructure in place to be okay. Let's look at a couple, like Colorado, always interesting to me. Colorado, an example of of a state that opened up quite early and to some concern, including my own. Colorado, nevertheless, though its points are all over the place, the average, the general trend, if we had to guess, is it's shrinking. Colorado is dropping 2% a day. Colorado is looking good. Georgia, also an early opener, not looking quite as good, but growing less than 2% a day. It is accelerating upwards, but not by a lot. So Georgia, not looking quite so good. Texas, looking good, dropping 1.5% a day. We'll look at New York and New Jersey actually let me just show the top 5, just to give us a sense of what's actually happening here. In the top 5, everyone is doing very well, shrinking, even accelerating in most cases, except for California. California is showing it more than 2% growth and a slight upward trend. California is actually trying to be a warm spot. It isn't. Again, if we look back at the new daily cases per million, California, for all that it's got a bad trajectory to it, it has 50 cases a day. It did have one really bad day where it had 80 cases a day, still not even a warm spot. So yes, it might go there. If these 3 dots here are part of a new trend that's going to shoot straight up that way, it'll be at 300 in a couple weeks, and 600 in a couple more weeks. California could go that way. We'll see. Right now, it's not looking great, but again, at least it doesn't have that many cases per capita. So in the top 5, everything looking good except California. Top 6, top 7, top 8, top 9. Have to go to the 9th. and before we find anything that's anything but good news. The top 10 are, 8 of them are clearly on recovery road. Florida is just barely looking bad. It is growing slightly, and it is trending slightly upwards in its growth, like California, but not as bad. But in all these cases, these are small percentages we're talking about. So look at the top 10 states in total cases. They're all looking good. What does this say? To me, it says these 10 states got to be in the top 10 by being first wave and second wave states. New York, New Jersey, they got there by being first wave and second wave states, maybe Massachusetts as well. And then you look at the second wave, New York and New Jersey, and maybe Massachusetts might have been first wave. Then we looked at Illinois and Michigan and Louisiana. I'll bring in here too. Well, Louisiana actually looking bad again. That's an example of someone that bounced and is looking worse. But the worst states, the states that have had the most cases, appear to have peaked and we appear to be done with them. So now it's everyone else's turn, I think. All the gray states down here, and plus all the 25 we don't even have on our list because they don't have enough cases at all. It's their turn. We'll see. Maybe Georgia's going to be the next one. Maybe Colorado. Colorado's doing well right now, but we may see a third wave. But I think the third wave is going to be different states from the first and second wave. This is what we're seeing so far. Once a state gets over it, it usually stays over it, but there are exceptions. Look at Florida, which was negative for a bit and now is coming back. What I also tend to see is that when something like that happens, where a state does well and then bounces, that its second bounce, it's like an actual ball. First bounce is high, second bounce is very low, third bounce is almost imperceptible. And so we'll see how this goes, but if it follows the trends as I'm just say intuitively remembering them to be, I don't have obvious data on this. I mean, I do, but I don't know that I can show it. The bounce, if it follows the way that I believe I have seen, Florida will probably peak there at 1%, drop back down to 0 in the next week or two, and it maybe never see 0 again. But we'll see. And it's all speculation. The data we got here is the data we got here. And the data we got here says there are some states that are still trending upwards. Alabama, California, Georgia, Louisiana, Indiana, and Florida. Those are the ones that are growing and accelerating. Not too many of them, but it's enough to slow the descent of the United States overall curve. If you look at percent tested, New York is outstripping its trend line pretty dramatically. These dots are way above the line. That means it's accelerating. It's doing very well. Massachusetts, Louisiana also doing very well. New Jersey. Let's look at a couple of those metrics that I like so much. Those proposed by California and others to say when is it safe to relax a little bit some of the restrictions. California says it's safe to relax some restrictions when a county, but say in this case state or nation, is testing more than 0.15% of its population a day. Who's doing that now? Well, New York is doing a lot more than that. Illinois, Connecticut, Louisiana, Michigan, Georgia, Massachusetts, Tennessee, New Jersey. So you can see the ones that are there's a lot of representation of first and second wave states here. We have New York here. We have New Jersey, which is just crossed into here, but has been sharply upwards and accelerating its testing. First wave states. We have Illinois and Michigan, second wave states. Louisiana, I'd say also second wave state. These are states that have mostly gotten over it as far as we can tell, and that is maybe because of this very graph. They may have gotten over it and really put a lid on it because they've exceeded, because they're testing so many people per capita. Compare with California, which I've often complained about California's testing. I don't complain so much anymore because at least they're middle of the pack, but they are not at that 0.15, nor super close to it. It'll be another week before they get there. So according to that, if this were the most important factor in making a uphill into a hill that goes back down again, California won't turn back down for another week. That'll be when it's crossed this line. And New York crossed the line on May 5th. Let's just do. I sometimes do this speculation. It never quite seems to work out the way I wish it would. So yeah, that's not really true. That New York peaked around April 8th. April 8th? Yeah, New York peaked around April 8th, around when it crossed 0.1, and then it's just kept going upwards from there. So I don't know if this is the reason, but I do know that some states are using that as a metric to open, and those are the states that could, if that metric were used, could open. If we look at the number of the percent of positive tests. Test 100 people, how many people are positive? Well, if 1 is, that's a 1% positive rate. If 10 people are positive, it's a 10% positive rate. How many people out of every 100 we test are positive? Now we could see in New Jersey, this was kind of astonishing, to me at least. Half of all people ever tested were positive. I mean, that's because they were only testing people who were literally in the ICU on a ventilator with COVID symptoms, and so you'd expect would be a whole lot of people that actually would be there because they have the virus. But this number has dropped a lot in New Jersey. It's down to 25% positive. But the number that's floated around is 10% or 8%, depending who you ask. And so New Jersey, the worst of all, is nowhere near that number. It still has to shrink it by at least twofold or threefold. New York, around 20%, also nowhere near that number. They're still testing, they're still finding a lot of people when they test, and they're testing a lot of people. The ones who are near that number is a select few. We have, just recently, Ohio and Michigan, which have just crossed into this elite testing in terms of, and I would say this, if nothing else, having a testing rate under 10% means that under 10% of your population is actually infected. I think we can safely say that the people being tested will tend to be more likely to actually be positive than the population at random. Because there's a reason they're being tested. They met someone, or they travel, or they have symptoms, or whatever. And so to me, this graph gives a very nice maximum infection rate in the population right now. And so this suggests to me there couldn't be more than 10% of Ohio currently infected. And that's not much of a maximum. I don't think many people who think Ohio has 10% currently infected. But as these numbers drop, we're going to probably see them level out at some point right where the infection rate actually is. So where is the infection rate? Well, probably in the 1 or 2% range, maybe, current infection. Not saying whoever's ever been infected, those numbers might be 10 or 20% in certain hotspots. But as these numbers drop, we start to get a limit on how much infection could currently be happening. And so, Arizona also, 9%, Georgia, Wisconsin, Alabama, North Carolina, Texas, Washington, Florida. Always surprises me every time I see it. California, for all the ways that California is not recovering right now, and we've seen it's growing, it's not obviously recovering right now. It has the second best, and has for some time had the second best positive test rate. 5% of tests in California come back positive, so 95% come back negative. And again, I speculate that means that no more than 5% of California currently has the virus. I just don't see how that could be differently. How we could have 10% of population currently infected, and yet when we test, we only find a 5% positive rate. I think it's got to be much lower than 5% of the population currently infected. And in fact, it could very easily be 100 times lower than that. I don't know. 10 times lower than that. But it gives us a nice maximum. In Tennessee, best of all, also around 5%. So that's the elite. How many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. About half of states in our top 25, which I don't know how that would translate to all 50, but about half of the worst hit states have met this criteria and are getting less than 10% positive. That's a good thing. And all of it's dropping. All of it. Everyone's dropping. Well, I always then say, except Minnesota. I don't know what's happening with Minnesota. Something weird. Could be a data anomaly, or it could be that Minnesota really is somehow up at 10% and holding steady. But in any case, at least they're holding steady. This isn't their real trend line. Their trend line is now horizontal. They had a spike, it's horizontal, and everyone else has gone downward. So hopefully Minnesota will soon be in the elite as well. It just has to drop 0.5% to get there. All right, moving to the counties of California. California, as always, not looking so great. I will again bring back the baseline of reality, which is that California has 50 per million in cases. The number of cases per million per day is 50 per million per day, 40, maybe it's a little more some days. 50 per million per day is half the number that I would say puts it in the position even of being called a warm spot. It's certainly not a hot spot. It's not a warm spot. It doesn't have very many cases per capita. However, it is a big state, so it has a lot of cases. But just for comparison with other countries, other states, it doesn't have many cases. Now, it will have a lot of cases if it keeps doing something like this. May 26th, yesterday's data, unexpectedly sharply upwards. The highest day I think we've had for some time, and probably forever, the most new cases, 1,800, just keeping that in mind, that where New York has, this is Los Angeles, I didn't mention, New York can have 20,000 new cases in a day. Los Angeles here, the biggest contributor already, the biggest daily contributor, just jumped to 1,800 from 1,000. One day does not make a pattern. Even 2 days doesn't make a pattern. But the trend is upwards, even without that day. And if we start to see days like that, where Los Angeles is in trouble, I don't believe anything yet, not from one day. The past 4 days were okay, but still trending upwards. So however you look at it, Los Angeles isn't doing great. They're not leveling off, much less dropping in their daily new cases. And everyone else is kind of noise. You put it all together, all these are combined to be more than Los Angeles, but it's hard to point your finger at any particular county that is contributing significantly because Los Angeles is so far ahead of everyone. But if we must, you can say, well, this is no 1,800, but Orange did have a tenth that today, and less than a tenth. San Bernardino had 5%, 8% or something of that. Orange and San Bernardino aren't looking great. San Diego and Riverside, both with relatively few cases, but flat or dropping. The only troubling angles are Imperial, Orange, and San Bernardino. The rest is the noise within the noise. It's so small it doesn't really matter. Oh wait, no, this was the total cases. I thought I was looking at per capita. So in total cases, these are the ones contributing, but I am more interested in per capita. I'm sure Imperial will make a stellar contribution here, as it always does. Imperial with 426 new cases per million in the most recent day. That is hot. That is starting to get hot. Imperial is small, but it's a hot spot. Kings, 200. It's above that 100 line that makes something a warm spot. These are the only counties in California that are hot at all. Los Angeles is trying to warm up somehow, and did have again this really exceptional day where it was at 180, which is again, that's that 100 line is where I look to say something's problematic. Los Angeles is problematic. It's crossed the line. It's just starting to seem like on a per capita basis, it actually is in a problematic place. It's growing slowly, so it's not seriously problematic, but it is there. And then there's the bizarre Imperial and the somewhat bizarre Kings, which really just have a problem right now. But fortunately, are small and do not have a lot of people to infect, and therefore a lot of cases to contribute. Looking at the rope chart, Marin is the current worst in growth rate. However, Marin is 24th. Again, it's a small county. The small ones tend to be a little extreme, so it doesn't mean much. Imperial has moved itself a step at a time right to the middle of our list. It is determined to be a major player in California in spite of its 2 to 3 million people. No, 200,000 people. It is just has a lot more cases per capita than anyone else, and it just keeps growing. 8% growth in Imperial. 8% growth, and it's the highest hotspot we've got in California, and it's a real hotspot at 450. That's pretty hot. That's pushing New York levels. So I always think I shouldn't spend that much time on Imperial because it's so small, but it is hot. Maybe it's going to infect its neighbors. It's certainly the news here. Sonoma, also looking problematic. Monterey, and the big picture of the rope chart. Look at all these lines above zero, or rather, look at the lines below zero. I can list them almost on one hand. As Tom Lehrer once said, no, actually, he said you were missing fingers. I could list them on one hand if I were the guy from The Princess Bride. We've got Kings, San Diego, Tulare, San Francisco, Solano, and Santa Barbara. 6 counties that are shrinking. The rest are growing. And of the ones that are growing, they're mostly trending upwards. There are a couple of ones that are trying to turn the corner back to negative growth. And this one here, for instance, Fresno is looking okay. But mostly, if you look at this graph, it certainly doesn't look good. We have growth in the vast majority of the top 20, the major counties, growth daily in new cases, and accelerating. As always, I'm not in a place, nor do I necessarily think anyone is, to say why this is. My job here is just to report the numbers, and I often speculate, but it can only be speculation. Why are the counties of California growing? Why are they growing now when they were shrinking a month ago? Testing? Actual new infection? Those are always the real question. And if it is actual new infection, why is that? Is it because we're unlocking some? Is it because people are suffering from willpower fatigue and unlocking themselves individually against guidelines? I don't know. We may eventually get some studies coming in saying how many people really are breaking this or that rule. The early studies from cell phone location data suggested the United States was doing a very good job compared to other countries even at sheltering in place. I'm guessing that we are not doing nearly as good a job now. And of course, there's the whole debate around masks. Masks are an extremely big political topic right now, and there's a cultural war, really, I think, going on around masks that isn't based in science. Either way, frankly, I will say I have read and found out whatever I can about masks, and I don't think the evidence is persuasive on either side of this argument. I wear a mask. It's required by law. If your locality requires you to do it, I think everyone should follow the law. And at the same time, I do think it's entirely possible that some months from now, when the real studies come back, we're going to find masks do nothing. Maybe they even hurt. I also think it's very possible we'll find that masks reduce the spread by 50%, or 100%, or 90%, not 100%. They may be very effective, they may be ineffective, but it's tearing people apart to fight around that. My hope is, in fact, it's certainly true, that in one sense masks don't matter because we have so many other kinds of ammunition against this virus. We have so many ways of fighting the virus that if everyone wears a mask or nobody wears a mask, we're still going to beat the thing. There's no doubt about that. But will more people die if a bunch of people don't wear masks? Plausible. Not certain, not proven, but very plausible. Anyway, maybe that's why California is going this way. It's not just the Republicans who are saying, I don't like masks. It's not just gun toters in Michigan. I have lots of hippie friends, and some of them are very against masks as well, for their own reasons. And so there are multiple levels of this mask war going on. I will say, I wear a mask and recommend you do as well. It doesn't have to be effective to be a good idea. If nothing else, think of it as a badge of patriotism from, well, I don't know. It plays both ways. You can wearing a mask can be a badge of patriotism of protecting your fellow country members, or it can be a badge of patriotism of standing up for freedom not to wear a mask. So I'll just say I wear a mask. And the many more scientists recommend that you wear a mask than don't. I'll say that as well right now. And we're getting studies in, so next time we'll know better. Though hopefully next time we'll have 100 billion surgical masks and N95 stockpiled somewhere, and we won't have to be sewing our own masks out of old diapers. All right, percent population tested by county, I mean. We have San Francisco doing tremendously well. Imperial actually has a really good data point just now. They just bumped themselves up to 5%, which is good because they are the hottest spot in the state. And then we have Los Angeles, also pretty hot, also doing really well. San Francisco actually isn't a hot spot, never has been, is doing quite well as I recall. They're one of the ones, are they not, that has everything going for them, shrinking and accelerating. So San Francisco has it all. They've got it in the bag. They never had a problem, serious problem, relative problem. Of course, any case is a problem. Any death is a problem. But relative to other places, San Francisco has never had a problem, not one that puts them in the top. And their cases just keep shrinking, even from the small place they were already at. So, and they have the best testing. Go California. Go San Francisco. There are some counties we don't have data for, but the ones we do are all above 1.5% roughly. So things are looking good across the spectrum. Literally, this is almost a spectrum. It's almost like it is actually going the Roy G. Biv order here. Maybe not. Anyway, across this rainbow of counties, we have very good testing. And do we have it? Yeah, the tested daily per county is a lot harder to get good data on, but I'm a little leery of some of this data. But I will say that as far as we can tell from the limited data, this is really based on the previous graph, all the counties are accelerating with just a few exceptions. Accelerating, and the very best of those is Imperial. So I never see Imperial in the news. Even when I go digging, I can't find anything about Imperial. It's like the Qatar thing, just because they're small. But Imperial and Qatar, at least I think they know they're in serious trouble, even if nobody else has noticed. And they're doing this. They are testing the heck out of their population. And so that 0.15 number, percent of population tested daily, well, Imperial has doubled it. Santa Barbara and Riverside have some data points way up there, but the trend line certainly isn't there yet. Los Angeles is doing way better than that number. Sonoma and San Francisco are doing better than that number in the population tested daily. And Kings has just crossed over, and soon we will have Santa Barbara and San Diego also crossing into that place where the state of California says it's safe to open if you have this and several other criteria. And then there's a cluster down here that's not really that close. Not very close. A lot of counties which appear not to be testing anywhere near the state guideline yet. Okay. Sadly, I do not have the other number that I like so much, which is percent positive. I don't have that at the county level. But I will say that at the state level, I will remind, the number tested positive, California is the second best of all the list. So if California is testing on average 5% positive, certainly there are going to be a lot of counties that are under 10%, and a lot, in fact, that are under 5% probably. And maybe some are not, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if almost all counties are under 10%. It's plausible, at least, that if the center of the cluster of all counties is 5%, that it might be that the very worst one is no worse than 10. In any case, there are a lot of counties that are doing well by that metric too. We just don't know which from this analysis. Okay, I'm, as always, over time. That's the summary. The counties of California not looking good, or not looking very good. California as a whole is growing, but the states are doing quite well, and the countries are doing pretty well. And testing just keeps ramping up, which we hope will make this all go away in a matter of months. I'm Greg Farrar. Thanks for